Good evening. Welcome to the View Up Air. I am your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is September 25th, 2019. Tonight on the show, there is no Brownface scandal without dirty tricks. There's no question that the behaviour depicted in past incidents by Justin Trudeau creating the Brownface, Blackface scandal is racist behaviour. Society changes at glacial speed, and similar incidents still take place in present day. But the period of time straddling the beginning of the 21st century is not our distant past. And to his credit, Justin Trudeau said so himself when accepting responsibility for the evidence presented to an astonished global audience. The speed with which the Liberal Party campaign acknowledged that it was Justin Trudeau in those pictures gave hint that they knew this was coming at some point. There was a strategy in place to admit, atone, and try to move forward. Well, what else can you do under these circumstances? Also true to form came the firestorm about the competency of Trudeau to lead from the usual sources, and many more, now interested in our sleepy little election. Why was that specific moment picked to release it? By whom? For what purpose? Was it intended to show the Canadian public the inadequacies of Trudeau, or was it part of something bigger? Polling shows the highest outrage coming from CPC and PPC voters, while acceptance of the apology is high among people of color. Does that make sense? There are questions about the source that nobody can find, the novice tasked with breaking this story, and the veracity of its intent. There is curious commonality in the background of many people involved, most at a public view. Amy McPherson returns to the View Up Here to talk about her work investigating and piecing together the timeline of the Brownface scandal that raises multiple new questions. And on the show page, I have a hyperlink to that piece of work that Amy did, and you can read it there, but that will be the basis for our discussion tonight. I'm not sure if it's the fifth or sixth time, but Amy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much, Glenn.
Well, it's good to have you on. You've been busy, shall we say, the last few days.
Very busy.
Now,
without lots of sleep.
Okay, now something that I want to get out of the way, and I know you do right off the bat, by no means is my having you on, and by no means is the work that you've done investigating this event, by no means and in no form is this any defense of what Justin Trudeau did in these pictures, correct?
Correct. That's my feeling on that. It's just that there is a lot of dubious information around how this story came to light, and my concern is the ethics of the press, and so that's how I had to address this, because it seems to involve foreign interference at this point.
All right, there we go. There's our little disclaimer, which otherwise, as far as we're concerned, is known as common sense and decency. No, this is not to support the actions of the Prime Minister. This is to focus on how this came to be and how it's developed and changed and morphed, and we're going to go through your article, and I do believe there will be a little bit of an update as we go along through that, but it is a long read. But how is it doing? How popular is it? Are people reading it?
Well, I haven't checked up on it today, but on day one, it got about 28,000 reads. And the really interesting part to me was I always perform long-form journalism, which is not popular in mainstream media anymore. And often people will complain about how long my pieces are. This time, not one single person complained, and the response was basically people telling each other it's well worth the read. So that was encouraging to see, at least.
Well, there's nothing I can say contrary to that. I mean, I'm used to the long investigative work from you, but I mean, that's your specialty. That's what sets you apart. And this is no deviation from that form. There are a lot of things that when you look behind the explosive surface of it, there's a hell of a lot more to this. And there seems to be more every day, and there seems to be a lot more revisions and corrections coming from the people that were supposed to have it straight to begin with. And is that the thing that stands out to you?
Absolutely, and it's become my habit. Media has gotten really unreliable over the past few years. There's basically almost no more copy editors anymore. There are very few editors. There's not investment in stories to, tease the whole story out. Sorry, I forgot where I was going with that. Your question one more time?
Well, it's just that we're seeing revisions and corrections from the actual people that used to be responsible for figuring all that stuff out before it went to the press. So,
thank you. So the revisions. So this is a habit that I've noticed lately, that just about all mainstream media, when they edit their work now, they're not identifying when they do, and stories are changing absolutely completely. Sometimes they're taken off the internet and scrubbed off the internet, and they're important for research purposes and for our political history for that matter, but they just go missing in the blink of an eye. So I'm in the habit now of every time I read something, I archive it right away so that I'm able to reference it again if I need to. And I use the website archive.is. The Wayback Machine is also helpful, but it's a little glitchier. And archive.is, you can put a button right in your toolbar of your internet browser. So if you're on a page, you just hit the button and it'll start archiving it for you. So that's the way that I read anything online anymore, and how I happen to come up with the evidence of what's happened when stories are edited. If I didn't do that, no one would be the wiser.
Yeah. So I gather that is a large part of why you basically no longer have anything to do with mainstream or corporate media.
Corporate media has been absolutely decimated. I mean, everybody's familiar with that. There's been disruption in the industry with the advent of digital journalism. But still, the first people that went were anyone doing long-form or investigative pieces, because they cost so much to invest in. You need the lawyers on hand to fact-check for libel or anything of the sort, and they don't want to pay out for that anymore. They want to get interns and young people that have just finished their courses to come and write for free or for cheap with very little oversight, and so you get 700-word max on what the weather was today, more or less, and anything of significance is just about done now in Canada. That's why a lot of reporters do seem to go to either Europe or the United States, where they still have a little bit of support for that if you can manage to get your foot in those doors. But corporate media has been quite corrupted the world round as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of political ownership or management of a lot of these agencies, and I've run into it before where I've submitted stories, and my complaint was CBC, and anybody can look this up when they post jobs. CBC reserves the right to edit any of their reporters in any way that they see fit. And that's not okay by me, because the editor can go and change the complete meaning of your story. And I did have that happen once, and I had a really big argument with CBC over it. And that was ultimately my end of days there.
Well, there was a time when that simply did not happen, correct?
Correct. It wasn't like that. I mean, I used to have a great producer who was really supportive, but I guess it was during the time of the Harper government. You got to take into consideration CBC being funded by the government, so there's a direct correlation there. And the board of directors was stacked with conservative supporters. Editors were bent that way, and then all of a sudden you couldn't write anything critical of the conservatives, which in my view is just the job of the Fourth Estate. It's not, doesn't have anything to do with the party. It's that you're holding the government to account, but you weren't allowed to do that anymore. And then even with Justin Trudeau getting elected, he did make a couple changes there, but it's not enough to undo 10 years of Harper and how far deep that damage went. And then outside of CBC, it just happened from the corporate perspective, where you got political people owning, purchasing, and managing like Post Media, Quebecor. These are all conservative politicians that are overseeing anything that can be published. So there's no room for anyone to do the job of the Fourth Estate as far as I'm concerned anymore. We're in a situation of infotainment at best.
Yeah, and we certainly have no shortage of the evidence that keeps piling up in that direction. I mean, I can think to a certain scandalous person being given an op-ed space in the Globe and Mail recently. I mean, that certainly raised some eyebrows. There was the op-ed in the Vancouver Sun that caused quite a bit of uproar. So it's not one-offs. It is a pattern. But I find it interesting that in your description there, you mentioned how organizations are turning to interns or newly graduated people. Well, that will certainly have relevance as we move along the story. So to begin to take this article apart and get it across to people how this connects, I mean, I'll just leave it to you to start us off, because as we know, one evening, I think it was last Wednesday evening, Time magazine printed an article that made international headlines. And I guess take it away, Amy.
By Ms. Annapurna Kembampati. She was a recent graduate, as I had described, but she didn't even go to J school, so she had no study in journalism at all, and she did some courses on information, handling information, but more from the point of view of managing databases, and she writes code for that matter, which we'll get into a little bit more. But she has no skills in journalism whatsoever, and she was given the biggest story of her life, which could even stand to be the biggest story of her career yet, for all we know, without any experience to do it, without any editor to guide her, even in the proper places to go and try and verify it. So it became quite a beast on its own. It was quite problematic what she wrote. She didn't verify half of what she needed to. And it all boiled down to a mysterious Michael Adamson, who no reporter in Canada can manage to locate, and everyone's been trying to. All major outlets have been trying to. I'm aware, I won't say who, but I'm aware of reporters that were dispatched to a couple of locations in Vancouver to locate this person, according to information that's in 411 and different business registries. But it's all come up empty. No one can find him, and the only Michael Adamson that I could find is the fine artist from Toronto, and he was quite skittish, about everything that's happened, because he got an overwhelming amount of phone calls. Like, the phone just kept ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. He got very uncomfortable, and then other Michael Adamsons started contacting him saying, was it you? It wasn't me. Do you know who it was? Because they're all getting harassed that way. But no one has managed to turn up this purported source that Annapurna Kembampati used in her Time story. So, that doesn't pass the sniff test of verification in Canadian journalism. And then yet, everyone in Canadian media ran with it anyway without being able to verify those parts of it. And it's not that it changed the fact that it happened. Trudeau admitted it, Liberal Party admitted it, Trudeau apologized. But still, you can't have contaminated sources in your work, because then it brings scrutiny to the whole story.
Well, the interesting thing about, just the way you laid out the first part of your story, and, just because, people will listen to this in the future, and people are going to forget. And this was featuring a picture of Trudeau dressed in brownface makeup for an Arabian Nights themed event during his tenure as a teacher at the West Point Grey Academy private school in Vancouver. The thing that shocked me immediately about where it came from was, it took less than 48 hours before it was 5 different Michael Adamson have said nope. And then there's the interview that you did with the fine artist in Toronto. And we've seen nothing come from this so-called prestigious Time magazine about who this guy is and where he is. So I just don't understand how people can accept, like, this isn't the New York Post that come up with this. This is Time magazine. And they can't verify a stick of their source or their timeline for that matter. But yet the rest of the media world just accepts it.
I want to help listeners understand a little bit of what's going on at Time magazine right now. So a few people had tweeted to me about the Koch brothers' money being involved, but that's not true anymore. The magazine was sold twice in 1 year in 2018, and the new buyer was Benioff, and he is a billionaire worth about $6 billion from the Salesforce company, Silicon Valley. He's a native of the area, and he took it over. There were hundreds of different suitors trying to purchase Time, including David Pecker of the National Enquirer and friend of President Donald Trump. But they ended up taking an absolutely huge loss in selling it to him. He's characterized as a Democrat, and he does have some Democrat positions, but I'm not aware of him coming out, as being a partisan factor. But so he promised to keep a hands-off approach with management so that the editorial section would remain intact without outside and political pressures on it. But he got it for a steal. He got it for about $300 million discounted off it to get into that position. And as it changed hands, I believe it was Meredith Corp to Benioff, and 1,000 people were fired. They were given their walking papers because the markets contracted so much. And at this point in time, Time is being kept alive as a charitable cause, more or less. It doesn't seem to have the full function of a magazine, and it is so bad that they don't even have a directory for all the writers and editors. Like, that's typical in any news site that you would go to. You might need to go to the site map to find it, but it's in there somewhere. And they don't even publish that. They don't have email addresses for most of the people that work there, and it's what I call the Twitter shield, because a lot of them, you can only reach them through their Twitter account. So I tried to approach Anna Perna-Kambhampati. Michael Adamson had also emailed her, and you saw proof of that in my story. She's not responding to any emails, so, I went direct on Twitter to try and get her attention. She won't respond to me. She won't respond to anybody else. She won't grant any interviews to anyone in Canada, to question her about this Michael Adamson source. Or provide any info on how she came to the information, and that's a serious problem. They've basically just done a big drive-by and gone and hid behind a wall, and they're not accountable for what they're doing. You can't do that.
Well, I have the story from Time here in front of me, and even just reading it, on a first take, there's some things here. It's like, okay, that sounds interesting, but tell me about it. And they don't. The article itself says, earlier this month, Time obtained a copy of the yearbook with the photograph from Vancouver businessman Michael Adamson, who was part of the West Point Grey Academy community. Adamson was not at the party, Yes, and then right away, Adamson was not at the party, which was attended by faculty, administrators, and parents of students. And, and then there's this claim he saw the photograph in July and felt it should be made public. Well, if this happened in 2001, you're making it sound like he just saw the photograph in July of 2019, and you said he was part of the community. This doesn't add up. Right
it
from
doesn't,
the start.
and no one can confirm any involvement of any Michael Adamson with the West Point Grey Academy. So we've got an issue here. It appears to be a fake source for all that we can verify in Canada, and yet this is the number one news story in the world and in our election right now.
Well, and the West Point Grey Academy themselves have come out with their brand and their reputation, and they're saying, we have no idea who this Michael Adamson is.
Correct.
So why is it that stuff gets the 2-paragraph post online with maybe one tweet that it even exists, but yet this other stuff just continues to get hammered and hammered and hammered with no consideration that how is this possible? There's no follow-up. Isn't that something that you've seen happen a lot over the last, decade or so, is that if once you get the word out, even if at some point you do have to detract, the way the internet works, it was still out there. There's a vast majority of people who see the false information that will never see the retraction, will never see the correction, right?
Well, one of the really interesting things about the Trudeau-Brownface narrative is that all the media associated with it, not the reporting, but the actual photos, videos, there's zero attribution. And that's not ethical journalism. You have to cite where it came from so that it can be verified. And in each case, that's not being done except for this one apparently fake source. I've got to call it a fake source because not a single reporter in all of this country can manage to hunt this person down. And there's even noise now, that it's causing a lot of harm to other Michael Adamsons, that you would think that if there was a legitimate person, they would at least speak up, talk to one of our major outlets and say, I'm the person, it is a real person, it was me, I don't want to be identified any more than I am, but, just to say something so that it stops harming all the innocent bystanders.
Yeah, that seems to be something that they have no regard for, I guess what you could call collateral damage, not in any sense that I'm seeing. The other thing about it that really I figured, what are you talking about? There's a big piece missing here, was now the Telegram in London sent a reporter all the way to Vancouver to follow up, and he found squat. Absolutely nothing. He checked these addresses that there's nobody there. He phoned these phone numbers that aren't connected. He went to West Point Grey Academy, and he came up empty. So, the Telegram has a cachet just like Time Magazine does. So why is especially all the Canadian media won't let this go when around the world already people are starting to see that something ain't right?
Exactly, and that's not the only thing, though, because the Time Magazine, its story, it can't be verified, but then the other sources, the other pictures of JT and the video that came up, those also are not being given proper attribution. And we're going to get into this in just a little bit. I know that everybody's quite interested. I'm releasing some, quote, bombshell information tonight. I have found out some more new things about the situation that are going to make it even worse. I believe Elections Canada will have to get involved, and as we're speaking, I will begin to explain myself, but that's part of why we're discussing this and going through it point by point so that people will really understand once I do post it all just what kind of meaning it has, how serious it is. And I've got a thread already composed of 20 posts, and it's just waiting for me to hit tweet for everybody to see it. So I will do that at some point during our conversation. We just need to get a little bit further into what that's going to be about.
So I think at this point we can safely say that the original article from Time is unconfirmed, period. Correct?
Yes, correct.
The
Absolutely.
The evidence is true, the identity is true, but the entire story on how this happened cannot be verified.
And the reason that matters is because Time is an American enterprise. So someone solicited the American media to get involved with the Canadian election, and they put out erroneous information about it that is now unreliable, and it has a huge impact on whatever will happen in our election. It's the biggest issue that we're facing right now, and we can't trace anything back on who was involved with that. So, who solicited the foreign interference?
And, of course, with the new C-76 Election Modernization Act and new controls about who can spend money and who can say what, it also applies to media with the committees that have been formed of senior civil servants and members of the intelligence community to watch this sort of thing. And Elections Canada now actually has not a whole lot, but they have some claws back, and they're making Canadians quite aware that if you see something that you think is wrong, we want to know about it. Do you think that has any factor in why somehow it was a media brand outside of Canada that was chosen?
That's definitely a possibility. I'm not 100% sure, but there's a lot of mitigating information around it, such as Jason Kenney having been in New York 2 days before the story went live with Time. And I don't know if people have noticed, but it was all staggered on the same day. So the Time story comes out first, then the Global News story comes out with the video, and it did not attribute a source to that video, which we're going to discuss further in a moment. And then the third picture came out of the Deo instance, and there's still another picture yet that hasn't been attributed anywhere, which we'll discuss in a few moments. But it seems like it was a coordinated event, and once I post the rest of the evidence that I've now collected that's new on top of the investigation I already did, there seems to be collusion somewhere. There has to be, for that amount of coordination, for it to happen the way that it did. It was staggered absolutely perfectly in unison on the same day, no one giving attribution to the sources that they had or giving fake attribution. And there is another agency other than Time that gave fake attribution, which belongs to the Canadian media, and I will name them shortly.
Now, the other issue that you mentioned in your piece already is that the Time piece gave a direct source of the yearbook, Michael Adamson, but yet not a single quote from this explosive source. They just spoke for him. That doesn't do anything to bring credibility, does it?
No editor should have let that pass the sniff test. That doesn't pass journalism 101.
Well,
you can't, as the news, speak on behalf of other people without getting their confirmation of it. And there's no confirmation from any Michael Adamson anywhere in the world, let alone Vancouver.
Now, since Miss Campagne Party would not answer any Canadian requests, it didn't stop her from providing interviews to other American outlets. And less than 24 hours after the Time article, she granted an interview to NPR. And that didn't do her any favors either, did it?
No, that was quite incredible because NPR, in my opinion anyway, is generally quite reliable. It has had a couple hiccups in its time, as any news organization might, but it's fairly reliable. And I can only guess that because it's a Canadian story that they didn't bother to chase down the full story. They just gave Anna Patty a soapbox to repeat herself, and she dug her hole even deeper when she did that, because she said that she heard it from a gossip circle in Vancouver, but that gossip circle also cannot be confirmed. She didn't say that Trudeau apologized when she was addressing that very press conference, so she really misrepresented Trudeau and the PMO in the way that she spoke on NPR. So NPR gets a black eye out of this too, and I'm sure that they had no intention of that, but they're dragged into it now.
Well, yeah, I found that very strange because, first of all, as we said, the Time article itself says it was from a yearbook given to them by Michael Adamson. Then she goes on NPR and says, well, actually, I heard about it from a gossip circle in Vancouver. While I'm in New York City and I know absolutely nobody in that part of the world.
Right.
It just seems ridiculous. And, yeah, like you said, I understand that NPR would be like, okay, but to say that, which is, I mean, by then, this was on its way to the number one story in the world. And for the lead reporter with no reporting degree or experience to give two different paths to the evidence in her story seems ludicrous to me.
Right. She won't name Michael Adamson again when she spoke with NPR, and in fact, she has never said his name again since. It's been reverted now to a gossip circle in Vancouver, and she won't name a direct person anymore. But the Time article has not been edited to remove Michael Adamson, whoever he may or may not be.
Wow. So now there have been all kinds of reporters in Vancouver around Grey West or West Point Grey, and there have been comments from parents. I mean, there was an article that was in the Globe and Mail on the 19th, and this was done on the ground in Vancouver, and they talked to people who were at the Arabian Nights Gala, and it's a very different picture. And for Anna to say there's this gossip circle, well, it's certainly none of the people in this article, that's for sure. Because, let's see, Vancouver realtor Wayne Hamill, who attended the gala with his then-wife Vicky, gave an interview, and he said, I recall thinking, wow, he's really into it, but it wasn't in a negative way. In the context of the party, if we had done the same thing without the blackface, if we can call it that, it would be nothing. It would just be a costume. I didn't take any personal offense. I didn't think there was anything racial about it in the context of that it was an Arabian-themed party. Now, this Wayne Hamill said he does not support Mr. Trudeau politically. He says the future Liberal leader, then 29, seemed to be enjoying himself. And the existence of the photo has been known to staff, students, and parents for years. So now West Point.
I just want to interject for a second here. I'm just personally registering my disagreement with Hamill's characterization. I in 2001 would have found that photo racist. I plainly admit that. Trudeau has admitted that and apologized for it. So we differ in our opinions there. 2001 is a long time ago, 18 years ago, and things were a bit different then. You'll get different takes from different people depending on their skin color and region in this country, how those issues were approached. So it may be that there was no issue whatsoever. Nobody could see anything about it being racist in 2001 in Vancouver area. I personally would have, but that's his take. So, and there were other people at the party that also felt that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I think the explanation for that is where Trudeau himself said privilege. I think that's exactly what Mr. Hamill is demonstrating here, but be that as it may, I think it demonstrates the environment that this was done in, the norms for this school community were not, what I would call progressive, to put it mildly. But West Point Grey came out themselves And they said, our 2001 gala event was organized by a culturally diverse group of parent volunteers and was intended to be celebratory and respectful. That said, we recognize cultural sensitivities have evolved over the past 18 years. So if these people knew who this Michael Adamson was, don't you think they'd be cooperative and try and get out from the glare of this?
I think so, but that didn't happen because nobody happens to know this phantom person.
Exactly. So my point is there's no way West Point Grey is hiding this Adamson. It's looking less and less like this dude even exists.
Which then puts an element of fake news within the story. Although the photo is real, the way it was explained was from it had a fake news torque on it. So you've got an issue there, and since they're American and they're impacting the Canadian election, I think Elections Canada has to look at that to see foreign interference. You know, was this a mistake or was this done on purpose? Because if it was on purpose, that's meddling.
Absolutely. Now, the next thing that I want to tell listeners about in your piece is that with the NPR thing where Anna kept talking herself onto this completely different path of discovery for this information from the one in the article that's never been amended, she said there was a few people gossiping about it. And you looked into it. The Facebook group for the alumni of West Point Grey is very small. Nobody new has joined in the last month. There's like no traffic. It doesn't seem like there is any visibility of this so-called gossip group on social media.
It's private, and you have to ask permission to join. So you have to get vetted by the administrator. And I assume that would mean as well that you likely have to have something to do with the school for them to bother to let you into that area to talk about anything about the school, because that's children that go there. No one's going to put their children out free on the internet for anyone to tinker with.
What I'm getting to is it was, she didn't come out and say, but I mean, anybody who's on the internet these days, gossip circle, what's the first thing you think? Facebook. So here we are, this private group, very small, doesn't have a lot of people coming and going, but yet this reporter in New York City is going to get into this Facebook group to hear this? It seems ridiculous, doesn't it?
It does, and especially since her way into this group and having any information from it, she, in the Time story, she explained that she reached out to the Michael Adamson. So she's claiming that this Michael Adamson existed, had some knowledge about it, and she approached him for it. So that creates another layer of problem that needs to be sorted out. How would she come to know this person when no one else in the world knows this person and can't find this person, and that group is closed? To me, it sounds like journalistic fraud.
Well, it seems very, very not helpful. Let's put it that way. Now, the other thing I wanted to address was also on NPR. They asked her, what did you try to do to get confirmation? What did you try to do to get comment? And again, as you, I think, very correctly wrote, part of the problem is Americans don't understand how our government works. She was trying to contact the Prime Minister's office during an election writ. You might as well talk to a brick wall. There's nothing there to contact.
They're not able to speak. If anybody
Yeah.
answered the phone in the PMO, they are not allowed to comment because it's in a caretaker government position, in which case all the parties are responsible for speaking for themselves and their incumbents.
But she alluded to it as if there was some sort of effort to not respond, effort to deny, which is completely unfair and unfounded. But yet then she says, well, then I contacted the campaign, and oh yeah, there was no problem.
Yeah, she misrepresented the PMO.
Yeah, it made it sound to Americans like the Canadian government didn't want to talk about this.
Yeah,
and that's
wouldn't respond
ridiculous.
to Time magazine.
Yeah, ooh, how dare they? I mean, she has not proven herself to be able to back up her own story. She won't answer to anybody in the country that's affected. What else do you want to tell listeners? I don't know if I'm jumping around on the list or not. I'm not really sure. But is there anything you want to tell people about who Anna Purna Kabanpati is? Or do you want to leave it for later?
Well, the biggest problem with Ms. Kabanpati is her side project called Pocket Democracy. And essentially what she has coded and put into a trial state, I'm pretty darn sure would be illegal even in the United States, but her goal is to be able to reach people in the moment that they are voting. So she's created a program that you hold your smartphone over top of your ballot as you're about to mark your ballot, and it will read the information off that, and then it will pop you up recommendations, information about each of the candidates to help you make your choice. That's like having a special interest group holding your hand while you mark your ballot. So this is her interpretation of how politics works and how she can affect them and how she can affect them at Time magazine. So she doesn't have a correct outlook, a legally compliant outlook, and then she approaches Canada's election? Serious? I'm curious, how much information is she getting out of the Time database for all their subscribers? Is that going into her project as well? I think that the Americans are going to have to investigate that themselves, because she went on attack of the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, and according to her own biases, because she comes from a private Christian school, which is heavily anti-abortion, takes part in the March for Life that is syndicated as well on Parliament Hill. So with that criteria, and that was the very first criterion that she sought to rank anyone by, is their position on abortion. So if they will allow women's rights to make that choice over their own body, they got a negative rating. And she gave Governor Andrew Cuomo a negative rating by 74% because he subscribes to women's rights. And if this program is in operation at voting time, that's what she would be advising to people as they're marking their ballot. That's election interference. Her whole idea of doing good is to commit election interference based on augmented reality and psychographic manipulation. She's a sweetheart for Steve Bannon, just waiting to happen.
Well, the first thing I think about that is, anybody who's voted in Canada for a federal election, there's absolutely no pictures once you enter the voting station. Never mind when you're behind the 3-folded cardboard shield for you to mark your ballot. Forget it. There's no such thing as cameras in polling stations.
Right, and that's also giving them pictures of everybody's ballots. Can you imagine the fraud? They can't allow a threat like that to their electoral system.
No, it's
She's
insane.
A really dangerous person.
It's completely illegal in Canada, and I expect it to always be illegal in Canada. It's insane, but what about her background? It seems to have some marquee references, but there's certainly, you scratch the surface and it's just more surface. There's no body of work, is there?
No, there is none. She wrote one article at CNBC, but she was actually at CNBC as a web developer. It's just that she helped them do the coding for the page that they were working on for a particular topic, and the retail editor let her write a single piece there. Then that was an internship while she was still at Cornell University. Then she interned after that for 3 months as well at the New York Times, but there's no record of her doing any work there whatsoever. So that's just based on her word. I haven't been able to confirm it. I haven't been able to speak with her to get any kind of confirming documentation to prove that she did that. And then she used that as a springboard to get outright employed by Time magazine just a few months ago. She got employed at Time magazine in July at the same time that this imaginary Michael Adamson claims to have discovered the yearbook.
Yes, that's another interesting coincidence. Is there anything you want to say about the interview you did with the fine artist, Michael Adamson?
There's one update from him. I've spoken with him since I published the piece. He agrees with it. He thanks me very much for how I represented him, and that's kind of rare. People are often angry at you when you write about them, so I was pretty proud of that. But he's let me know that she still won't respond to his emails. He's been trying to contact her, and it's a brick wall.
Well, at least she's consistent. Now, a next very, very intriguing part of your piece is about the coincidences of the past, of so many people involved in the areas where tentacles are spread out for this story. I mean, we're talking about where West Point Grey itself is. We're talking about the people who are involved in Vancouver. We're talking about people who are working for provincial and federal parties that all know each other from employment in the past, and they all seem to have a certain commonality for who they've worked for at one point or another in the past. I'll just let you describe how you want to describe all these shady connections. That's what I call them.
All the hot spots that are raised by the Time article, be it Vancouver and Ottawa and the New York Times and the Times as itself connections, they all have ties back to the Conservative Party, whether that's provincial or federal. And there is quite a network if you take a look at my piece, and all the people that are working together are connected to one another, that have some connection to the fine artist Michael Adamson, which made him, a top suspect. And then there's Warren Kinsella as well. And Warren Kinsella published his piece, and he changed the date on it. Now, he published exactly 2 hours after Time magazine did. And I'm sorry, but that is not enough time to write about 15 paragraphs, to fact-check it, to put in all your hyperlinks, to get it formatted for the Internet, because you have to lay that all out, and edited and published. And he never did credit Time magazine with being the source of the photo that he had, yet it was timed, boom, boom, together. And then so that was on September the 18th. But on September the 19th, his article was changed to say that it was published on the 19th. And it's only because I archive everything that I read when I read it, and the moment I do it, that I could prove that he actually wrote that the day before. There's otherwise no proof of it.
Yes, that's part of the slideshow on the show page, indeed. And as you said,
and Warren Kinsella has his connections to Jody Wilson-Raybould, and his wife Lisa Kinsella also has very close connections, and they're connected to former Conservative Prime Minister Kim Campbell and a number of different entities. And it really, really irks me that Kinsella is described as a liberal activist by the media, because everybody knows better by now. Sure, years ago, sorry, my cat is trying to redo my work. She says I'm not giving her attention, sorry. But Kinsella. Okay, so he's got a lot of connections, and he's described as a liberal strategist, and he absolutely is not. I did a previous piece on what really happened behind the scenes with the JWR and SNC Loveland scandal, and he came up prominently in that as well. And everything that's happened about this West Point Grey Academy situation is right at her riding, and Kim Campbell's where she is as well. So it's pretty suspicious in that way that Warren Kinsella had a hand in this story and has the connections to them as well. And on top of that, he actually partnered with Nick Kuvalis. He's worked his way out of the liberal machine. He's from, he got to play with the old guard, but when Trudeau came in, a lot of people complained that he brought in his whole new team and new short pants, so, there wasn't room for him. Ever since then, he's been trying to get rid of Trudeau. He's done everything to campaign against him and gone to help every other candidate that he could to get rid of him.
That's absolutely true. There's no doubt about that. I mean, just to go back to the fine artist Michael Adamson again, for people who haven't read the piece, he's done work for an organization called True Patriot Love, which is about veterans and they have a solid program. They've certainly raised money. They're getting things done, but this possibility that his name was picked out of a hat, you question whether this could have been related to the people and the connections from this nonprofit True Patriot Love to the Conservative Party, and then away we go.
It's because the connection is direct. It's not implied. One of the executives on the board of directors for the True Patriot Love Foundation charity is also on the board of directors for Crestview Strategy. And Crestview Strategy is overwhelmingly staffed by former Conservative Party staffers, or like they've either worked with their elected people or for the party itself and managing its funds. It's like at least 90% of them have been involved directly with the Conservative Party, continue to be involved with the Conservative Party, including this fellow who also sits on the board of directors for the True Patriot Love Foundation. And you've got Cavallis connected to that system, which connects Warren Kinsella to that system, and we know Kinsella has basically committed journalistic fraud as well by wrongly dating what he wrote to try and distance it from the timepiece as if he wasn't working in tandem with them, and his article did come out in tandem without attribution to Time. So he purportedly had this already himself at the identical time that Time magazine did. And this might be the best place for me to start launching into the new information that I have.
Okay,
so that
could I just bring up one more thing about True Patriot Love that's also in the article? The chair of the foundation is Sean Francis. Sean Francis serves on the board of directors at the Fraser Institute, and he's been the chair of the Progressive Conservative Ontario Fund. He's accepted awards from former Conservative ministers and senators, such as Peter MacKay, Stephen Blaney, Julian Fantino, and Linda Frum. Well, there's a fucking all-star team if I ever heard it.
And don't forget who Jody Wilson-Raybould's father is.
Yes, indeed. And I just wanted to make sure we got that in, because that's just too big of a magnet to not get noticed. But yes, carry on, please. New information.
So there is new information that I have come across, and I think the best way that I can do this is to just kind of read my tweet thread out loud, and then I will post it, and everybody can grab the information out of it, and I can describe it as I go. So point number one, the original expose by Mercedes Stephenson on Global News concealed that the Conservative Party was her source of the racist video depicting PMJT. And again, I'm the only person in the country who happened to be able to prove this anyway, maybe not know it, but be able to prove it, because I hit my archive button the minute I had read that article. So in the first case, they explain it as they got it from an unnamed source. They wouldn't say who, and that they were trying to verify. And I've included the proof of that. So my second point then is the disingenuous story from Mercedes Stephenson was followed up by David Aiken, who is also from Global News. And the same afternoon, after she put out her exclusive about the video of Trudeau, he was caught on video telling the Prime Minister to step aside and quit and let somebody else stand in for him. Like, this was not a question from media. David Aiken is the chief political correspondent for Global News. He's supposed to be asking questions at a presser, and instead of asking JT a question, he basically told him to quit. So he took quite a partisan position on the record, and that's not supposed to happen in Canadian media. I wouldn't expect anyone not to vote, but you can't express your bias in your work, and he plainly did in that case. So I've included the video where he does that. My third point then is Global News then dramatically edited its original story by Mercedes Stephenson to finally admit that they received the Trudeau video from the Conservative Party. But then they concealed that they edited their story. So they went in and changed the story quite dramatically. There's only a couple paragraphs that are the same anymore, and they added that they got this from the Conservative Party, so that they were being transparent in what they did, and they just published it that way. And they left the same timestamp on it with no record whatsoever of editing the page. So I have the original of it, and I have what became of it. All right? And there's a reason why, and we're just about to get to that. So point 4, there was so much editing done to the Global News story that the first and second editions of the same article can't be compared side by side. Global News fundamentally changed the story, concealed editing, and hoped no one would notice. So I've got the evidence of that. Point 5. In the Sun News example covered by my investigation, Warren Kinsella redated his story a day later to conceal the evidence that it was published in tandem with Time, whereas Global News kept the same date but altered the entire story. Point 6. Global News was forced to come clean by CTV News when Scheer appeared unexpectedly on the television, and he confessed that it was the Conservative Party that gave Global News the Trudeau video, and not, like he didn't say, not the anonymous source like they reported, but I have the proof that they reported it originally as an anonymous source. So that really threw them off kilter, because CTV did broadcast that. Point 7. A quasi-relevant sidebar, given the foreign interference implications uncovered by my investigation, is that Mercedes Stephenson is connected to the U.S. Pentagon and used to produce news on their behalf. She's also a fellow of the Koch brothers operation. So that disclosure is never made in any of her articles, and when you have a severe conflict of interest like that, you should. But there's Mercedes with a direct connection to the U.S., a very significant one, and I've included her defense-based bio. Like, people don't know this about her, but that's really what made her career. And she participated in a number of things with the U.S. military. And then point 8. Although there was very little coverage of Andrew Scheer's confession, and it conveniently faded into the 24-hour news cycle, Narcity it also covered the surprising event. So there are two pieces of evidence that prove that Scheer did confess that it was him, that it was the party that handed this over. So that's what really forced Global's hand to edit their story, but they didn't do it honestly. They were caught like a deer in headlights, and what they did was incredibly dishonest, and we don't have very much regulation in Canada, but I'm sure that legally there could be some way to deal with that, because that was absolutely fraudulent. So then point 9, the producer for CTV Question Period also posted a video clip of Andrew Scheer's confession that was included in the Narcity story, so Global News couldn't stick to its original anonymous attribution anymore, and I will be posting that video by the CTV producer. I'm sure he was not on a mission to undermine Global News. He was just doing his job, but everything that was said in this conflicted with what Global had already presented and made it untrue. So they had to try and save face and change that quickly before anybody noticed, except I did. Then point 10. Then I've said, sorry, I've just got to go back one here for a second. There we go. So I've included where CTV also has published about that issue, and it invalidated half of what Global News and Mercedes Stephenson had said. So the next is that CTV News also is not in the clear, because in that story where it reported Andrew Scheer's confession that they received this as a result of the Conservative Party, they also covered a second photo of the Prime Minister at West Point Grey Academy that didn't provide attribution. CTV included this, didn't say where they got it. It's the photo where Trudeau is dressed up in the brownface and the turban, and he's standing with two Sikh gentlemen around him on each side.
Yep.
And I apologize if I have mispronounced that to anyone of that faith. I'm not religious. I'm trying my best here. So point 11, In fact, no Canadian media is providing attribution for what was technically the second photo of the Prime Minister at the Arabian Nights Gala by the West Point Grey Academy. I had to research to find its first use by a mainstream Canadian news reporter, and that turned up some more curious things. So, point 12. Canadian media's first use of the alternate Arabian Nights photo was published by the Niagara Falls Review, which is syndicated by the Welland Tribune and the St. Catharines Standard. It was written by Ray Spiteri, and I do have to declare it's possible that I have a conflict of interest in speaking about Mr. Spiteri, because that's the area where I grew up, and I did go to school with Spiteris, but I can't say that I know a Ray, and I haven't worked with a Ray, so I'm just being completely transparent here. So Mr. Spiteri was the first one to actually use that photo, and it happened in the morning. Now, I'll explain more on that in a sec. Sorry, I don't want to get it too confusing for listeners. So I've posted that article where it first appeared. It matters that no Canadian media will report where it obtained the second Arabian Nights photo because it originated on Canada land by a known Indigenous agitator, Robert Yago. And I mean him no offense. I'm also an agitator, but he's well known for the squeaky wheel, I guess you'll call it, and I don't mean to diminish any of his issues. They are absolutely serious, and I support Indigenous reconciliation. I'm not trying to be arrogant in any way. I'm just trying to be concise in what I'm saying and keep it on point with the story about the Brownface media. So there's that. You can't just go and lift somebody else's work, and this is what all of Canadian media has essentially done. They've lifted Robert Yago without giving him attribution, so nobody could really figure out where that second photo came from, and yet it's appearing everywhere. And it appeared in Spiteri's article in the Niagara Falls Review at the same time that Yago had even published his story. So it doesn't seem possible that the Niagara Falls Review could have gotten it from Canada land because the timing doesn't jive. And in the Niagara Falls Review piece, it acknowledges the video at Global, and Global in turn acknowledges a second photo, but there wasn't enough time for either one of them to know that about each other because they were both publishing at the same time. So point 4.
No, just hang on. I want to ask one thing. So even if you take it at face value, this newspaper in Niagara Falls is going to have access to somebody who may have that photo, who would have to be in the West Point Grey Academy of circa year 2000. How likely is that?
Well, the second photo actually came from a West Point Grey Academy newsletter, not even the yearbook, so it's even more obscure.
Okay.
And there is no explanation for how he obtained it. There's no attribution, nothing whatsoever. It just was a very coordinated release of these different media pieces all at the same time, and no one could explain where they got them from. And then Andrew Scheer went and opened his mouth and said, "Oh, it was me that gave the video to. It was the Conservatives that gave the video to Global." So it also makes everything else suspect that way, given that there was so much coordination. And Jason Kenney, as well as Doug Ford, were in the area of crossing the border. They went on a tour of the States together 2 days before the info came out, and 2 days before it all came out, whether it's any of the photographs or the video, that's when all Canadian media is saying they became aware of it, that they had just received it at the beginning of the week and they were trying to vet it. And then you've got the coordinated publication of everything.
All righty. Point 14, I think.
Yeah, 14. So how did Ray Spiteri, Niagara Falls Review, obtained the same photo that Robert Yago published on the same morning it was revealed? The former is in Quebec, and the latter is in southern Ontario at the border crossing New York and Time magazine. And I will further state that the piece in the Niagara Falls Review, it was used to go on the attack of the Liberal candidates in all adjacent ridings, including Vance Badaway, who I happen to know because I grew up in Port Colborne. He was my mayor before I had moved away, and he is the Liberal MP there. They even went after him with it, with this secondary photo that didn't have any attribution. So it was put out in the Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, and Welland Press to demoralize and discourage Liberal supporters and try and attach it to all of the Liberal candidates in the entire Niagara region.
Wow.
Like there was a real purpose to what Ray Spiteri was publishing, and he's going to have to be questioned too. There's going to have to be an investigation from Elections Canada, because it really appears like there was collusion between the press and the Conservative Party, and there definitely was in the case of Global, and that's provable on its face. So point 15. Of note, Doug Ford met with Jason Kenney in the U.S. to help campaign for Conservative interests. The Ontario Premier joined the Alberta Premier after the Alberta Premier flew to New York. So I've given an article describing all of that, because at that time, when they did their little Northern States tour together, Doug Ford said that he's a Republican all the way. So that was quite controversial and interesting, and that's how it fits into this narrative as well. Then 16. In reportedly separate incidents that aren't supposed to appear like collusion between certain Canadian media and the Conservative Party, Time received the first photo at the same time Global received the video, and Niagara Falls was given the third pick. Point 17. Why it matters. At the very least, Global News is caught red-handed doing work for the Conservatives that it tried to erase from its publication. It can only be proven because I archived the original story right away. Do apologize to everyone for repeating certain parts. Then point 18. Global News must report its donation of services in kind to Elections Canada, because it first reported the video from an unnamed source when it was covering for Andrew Scheer, who then ended up confessing that it was him. But when they put it out, like it has nothing to do with the Conservatives, they were actually doing work on behalf of the Conservatives. Scheer says that he gave it to Global to ask them to fact-check it, basically verify where it came from, and Global comes out with the story about it, not naming him. So that is a service in kind. That's a donation by Global News to the Conservative Party of Canada. It has to be registered. Point 19. Then magically, all three stories were published on the same day, staggered with impressive coordinated unison. Elections Canada will have to investigate the Niagara Falls review in addition to Sun News, Global News, and Time magazine now together, because it was that far coordinated. And point 20, the final, in case you, that's just I'm putting up my a copy of my original investigation now. So I'm going to tweet that live for everybody right now. It'll take a second for all 20 points to go up, and you can get all the evidence that I've put in there. Global News has something to answer for, at the very least. Niagara Falls review needs to be interrogated. Elections Canada has to investigate, and I don't know if this will initiate anything by the RCMP, but I will be filing complaints, and I would think it would be great if other people who are concerned about collusion between political parties and the media, if they also submitted a complaint.
Well, the other thing, not only do we have the outing of Global by the leader of the Conservative Party himself, but there was also a little bit of further backup that Global was completely full of shit, and I believe that happened on the John Oakley show in Vancouver.
Right, yeah, that's the other issue too. Jaskaran Singh Sandhu, and I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Do apologize, sir, if I haven't. John Oakley first said that these media clips and photos came from opposition research, and Sandhu responds, yes, so he confirms it. So how this ties in, John Oakley is part of the Global News brand, so he would be aware, he's apparently aware of where they got their source, and they say it was from opposition research, which is more confirmation that Global News was working on behalf of the Conservative Party.
Well, it does seem rather ridiculous that Global could be caught so plainly, and they've even got different outlets on their own network outing them. It's outstanding. Outstanding.
It's absolutely incredible. And the only way to know that that's how it went down was to have been paying attention in the moment that it happened, so that you can get all the original sources of that. And because that's my job, that's what I do. This is how I read anything on the internet. I save it all because I'm aware of how people behave and try and cover up what they've done. So it's just my natural reaction to everything. If I didn't do this, nobody would know, and nobody could prove it.
And that's what they're hoping.
Yep. And that's why they keep the trickle out, keep the headlines coming about the blackface, brownface, so that nobody actually looks into how the stories were made. But my interest is in media ethics, so that's what concerns me the most. Another
fact that you unearthed in your work is that the John Oakley show with Mr. Sandhu saying that this came from opposition research was before Scheer made his video confession. So,
yes, it was.
You know, this is starting to unravel. But of course, without surprise, well, I guess a little bit of surprise, I remember a time when if the networks, their news departments, and if the newspaper chains found out that the other guy was full of shit, they would be all over it. But we're not seeing that here at all in Canada of 2019, are we?
No, we're not, and that's why I think collusion has to be investigated to determine what went down and how this could possibly happen. Nobody held each other to account. The only way that I could figure it out was just by their misstatements that weren't in step with one another.
Well, the question now, I think that a lot of listeners are going to be asking is, if none of the people who are blowing the trumpet for the event, which everybody agrees he should have never done, and they are racist, everybody's agreeing on that, it's just the roadmap that everybody got to see this, they're not going to give up on pushing it as long as they can. I mean, I think it's pretty clear the Liberal Party themselves have said, well, they haven't put a number. So there's got to be more. They know there's more. So do you think that the media that are counting on this revenue that it's creating and the market share to bolster their advertisers, to charge the rates they're charging at this election writ period, which will inflate it anyway, do you think they're just going to keep ignoring the inconsistencies and keep pushing the quote-unquote story until the next piece of it drops? Are they going to try and keep this going?
Here's something I can tell you. It's something else that I have archived. I can add it to the post when we're done tonight. But this is straight from Warren Kinsella's lips to the Twitterverse. And he is, one of the authors of one of these hit pieces. He says, told a journal friend, I doubt the many Justin Trudeau scandal stories that media have been sitting on will see the light of day. He disagrees, says threshold has now been lowered and that many reporters now want to be the one who finishes him off. So Kinsella is all, hyping it up about the journalists that are going to finish off Trudeau.
Like
he's
it's a prize to be had.
He's also taken a very partisan position as a reporter. I guess you'd say he's an opinion columnist, so he doesn't have to be honest, but I think there needs to be honesty in Canadian journalism as a starting point.
Well, I guess, this is what you get when you have a decade of newsrooms being run by bean counters instead of veterans of the industry. We know that revenue is the motivating factor. If news was not profitable or close to profitable, it's a corporate decision to get rid of it. I mean, we saw that when City TV was sold. So, I mean, do you think their number one priority in this election season is to make money instead of inform people? Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and I would even go further in that at least a couple of the individuals that are involved in the conservative network that I laid out in my investigation are down as lobbyists, and I believe that there is relation to lobbying over the media fund, basically the bailout that Trudeau has promised. So there's a conflict of interest there when you start connecting it with people in the media that may be working together with them. It has to be looked at, and I'm not even sure it's so colluded. I'm not even sure that Elections Canada itself, the commissioner, could sort it out alone. I believe that an inquiry is needed.
Do you see a possibility that if there is a Conservative government after the election, that the plans for the media fund will be maintained and it will become a cookie jar for people who play ball?
I don't want to speculate. That's not my particular job to do, but it's obviously a possibility. You know, we couldn't know what deals were made with who, and when you've got that kind of coordination in advancing, this is basically it's just conservative advertising, although it has been done by the news, but it's because of how it was done that it's advertising. So I don't know if there's some kind of payoff for that. It's anybody's guess. If I get any proof of it, I'll let the world know. But that's why I think there needs to be an inquiry, because that question has to be answered now. There is no validity to the Canadian press. I don't mean that as the company, just to be very clear. Just all reporters in Canada and the mainstream media outlets. I have no criticism of the Canadian press as an organization itself.
Well, I mean, this will be one point where I can take my license as a host, because I speak my mind and my opinion. For months on Twitter, IRL, I've been trying to get the point across to people that Shaw Chorus, who are the owners of the global network, are, in my opinion, the official propaganda network for the Conservative Party of Canada. That is beyond a doubt in my mind. And to see them think that they are such leaders in this field of promoting the Conservative Party, and they are the ones who commit the biggest boner in this well-orchestrated, I would almost call it a syndicated plan for this to be broken at this point in time. Because, you know, like I said way back at the start of the show, as soon as I saw the reaction from the spokesperson from the Liberal Party campaign, how quickly and how assuredly they confirmed that it was Justin Trudeau in the pictures. That just told me right away that, well, they've just been waiting. They knew this was coming. So that changes my whole questioning about, then why did it come out? Why didn't it come out long time ago? Why is it right now? And, you know, I'm just a suspicious son of a bitch. And, you know, I mean, that just turned me into something's wrong right off the bat.
There's one fact that I can add to your curiosity there about Global Chorus Entertainment. Chorus Entertainment started out as a Christian-based organization. So it is ideologically aligned, and its radio stations, which I happen to have one of them very locally, and I have participated with them for different reasons in the past, they censor music heavily according to religious beliefs.
Yes, that is true. Chorus. Go ahead.
That you know takes us back to this angle here. Annapurna Kambampati, she comes from the Christian high school. The only thing that she's really pushing is anti-abortion issues, and she's involved there. And we know that the conservative right and the alt-right, they have grand issues with abortion, and they're determined to get rid of Trudeau because he supports women's rights, just like the attack on Governor Andrew Cuomo. So, you know, it just nothing passes the sniff test here. Nothing.
Well, I see that your 20 posts are up on your Twitter account. The other thing we wanted to make sure that people were aware of was with the changes with C-76, the Election Modernization Act, with the establishment of these committees to be watching elections, and there's more than one, and they have more than one field of expertise. One is strictly in an IT sense. They're looking for botnets, for hacks, for, you know, pen testing, basically. And then there's another one that is made up of people from foreign affairs, and justice and communications, and they're looking at more of the content of what's going on online, and they're in tight with the Commissioner of Elections. So anybody on Twitter has seen Elections Canada has been tweeting a million times more than they were allowed to in 2015. They're making sure people know how to vote. They know what the ID is, all those kinds of good things. But they're also saying, if you see something in this election that you think is not right, that is accusatory, inflammatory against a candidate or a party, which is illegal right now, they give you a form to fill out. So I know you have been encouraging people from what you revealed in your piece to do so. I don't think it's the easiest thing in the world to find on the internet. So do you have any suggestions for what people should do to get to the page where they can complain formally to Elections Canada?
When we're done this interview, I will dig up the link and I will post it on my account. I'll post it just as a tweet. I'll post it in the thread, and I'll post it also attached to my investigation so that everybody can find it in each spot. And I am aware other people have reported to me that they have filed complaints, and one person, they had to step away from their computer when they were in the middle of it. I think they had to go tend to their dinner on the stove or something like that, and it timed out on them. So it does keep a timer on. Just be prepared to sit there and fill it out. It's easy to walk through. It's super easy to do. Just don't let it sit on your screen and forget about it, because it'll time you out and then you'll have to start again.
But that's something that has changed. That is something that is new for the Canadian voter. I'm glad to see it because of the explosion of social media, even from 2015 to now. But this is a tool that the Canadian voter, the citizen, is there for them. So they should definitely be aware of it and feel free to use it, because guess what, people? We're paying for it to be there. So if you think this is a real problem, like many people do, more every minute, hopefully, listening, then that's another thing, right? I mean, it's not in Election Canada's mandate to ignore any complaints, is it? They must investigate every complaint they get. Isn't that right?
They'll have to respond to everything they get, and if they decline to investigate, they would have to give a reason why, and then that would be a political brouhaha if they did. So we'll have to see how it goes. It's something new, don't know how it's all going to play out, but this is theoretically on paper how it's supposed to go.
Well, we certainly have jumped around the list that we had, but
sorry.
Oh no, I'm just as guilty of it as you, but I do believe that we've covered just about every part of your piece looking at the mechanics behind this event. Can you think of anything that we didn't cover, or anything that you maybe want to bring up, like a redirect? Anything you want to...
The only thing I can think of is something that you haven't said yet, because I know that this one's a bee in your bonnet, which also impacts the things that I need to find out, but about the lack of filing itineraries. Yeah,
I was under the understanding that in the province of Alberta, it was law that when the Premier of Alberta is out of the province, not just out of the country, out of the province, on business for the government, there must be an itinerary filed so people know where he went and who he met. I mean, these are familiar laws. I know that there's one on the PMO. I know that the White House has one that's been ignored for 2 years. But these laws, I believe, are still active in Alberta. So I tried to...
They're not, the Doug Ford government in Ontario is not complying with releasing all the information properly, and they're giving a really hard time with ATIP's access to requests from reporters. So that's been a long-standing issue ever since the day he was elected, and we got a conservative government in Ontario.
Yeah, I believe the same thing is happening in Alberta. I did send out a couple of queries to a couple of good reporters on the Alberta legislature beat. I didn't get a response directly from them, but I got a response from somebody else affiliated with another news organization, and they said that that organization had tried to get some itineraries recently, and they had to go through a FOIP process. So the same games that Ford is playing, it seems like the Kenney government is playing. Yeah, I would be very interested in seeing the itinerary of Premier Jason Kenney in New York 48 hours or less before this all broke and hit the fan. I would be very curious. But
me as well.
We'll see how
me as well.
Well, we'll see how far this investigation goes, you know? I mean, I'm sure that they're not filing them because they think they don't have to. But, you know, maybe that'll come to court someday. I'm sure it will in Ontario. So we'll see what happens. But what you found in doing your work, you found proof, evidence of altering times and dates of stories to create a different cascade instead of a direct impact of this same thing.
As well as false attribution. Those points as well as false attribution.
So we have an original source that cannot be found. We have an original quote-unquote journalist who will not say a word. We have a media organization that is outside of Canadian law. We have leaks that are credited as anonymous and then confess to being coming from a party on both coasts almost, which causes a media reaction to do a frantic scramble to edit their own reporting, but yet all we're hearing about are the pictures, not all these leaks in the narrative. So I believe in what you're saying about collusion. There's no way this could be sold without there being some sort of understanding about what they're going to say about it and from what side. But I really don't know if enough Canadians are even concerned about what's going on anymore because they're tuning out. So the next thing I want to ask you is, the people behind this, whoever they may be, do they necessarily care that all these holes are being found? Because isn't that one of the main purposes, is just to erode the trust in institutions? The goal is to not necessarily hearts and minds and change votes, but if you ain't voting for us, stay the fuck home. Isn't that something that's going on?
Well, the goal of a campaign like this, Canada is fairly settled. At their in good times, and generally speaking, before this election, 35% of the voters support the Liberals, 35% support the Conservatives, about 15 support the NDP, and around 5 supporting Greens. I know they're jockeying this year back and forth for the different places, but still. So it's not a matter of trying to win new votes or win people over from the parties that they were originally with. It's about demoralizing Liberal voters just so that they don't have the gumption to go out and vote, that they feel too bad about everything that's happened. I'll just sit this one out. It's an amazing act of voter suppression. And as well for the millennials, because they're the largest voting bloc this year, they're really offended by things like racism and misogyny, and they're quite involved in social justice causes. So if they can be deterred from showing up to voting, the Conservatives could steal it with a majority if they just, make Liberals self-loathing enough.
Well, yeah, this is a major factor, because if you look back at 2015, the Conservatives really did not drop many votes across the country at all. It was like 250,000 votes, that's it. But what did change was the massive amount that the Liberal Party gained, and most of them, through research, was shown to be first-time voters. So are the Conservatives, or whoever's behind this, trying to play the reverse of that? They're looking for less is more?
Yeah, just make the young people stay home, make anyone, I guess they're called the snowflakes and libtards, according to conservative pundits. I apologize for using swear words of the like. I'm just quoting others. But if they can just cause them to stay home, the conservatives would have a chance at winning. And if they can't do that, conservatives don't have a hope in heck of taking this. That's what the game is all about. It's the only way they can win.
And I would find that to be a completely undemocratic activity. I think when people, and Canada's not alone, not by any stretch of the imagination in 2019, but when political parties in liberal democracies are actively campaigning and using tactics to decrease participation in democracy, we've got a real problem on our hands. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention was there has been a week of polling now, and especially Ecos and Frank Graves, who asks different questions because he's Frank Graves. And what we're seeing through his polling is that the most upset, outraged reactions to Brownface Gate is by people who tend to vote Conservative and PPC. How does this make any sense? These are people who have what is perceived as a racist position on the spectrum to begin with, are now suddenly the most pissed off about what Trudeau has done. So the authenticity hurts on that end as well. It's a bandwagon. That's all it is, because we hate Justin. But yet the same polling shows that the highest acceptance of the apology is from what demographic in Canada? People of color. So how does this whole thing make any sense when you look at the results after 1 week? I mean, what do you say about that? What they're trying to sell and what the reaction is from polling?
I have to be very careful in responding to this one. I'm mostly taking a pass on answering this one because I'll tell everyone this much. I've got a couple stories, a couple investigations that I'm working on right now. I really didn't mean or want to be sidetracked by the Brownface, Blackface scandal, but obviously that was important to address when all media ethics are at stake here, and therefore free and fair informed voters is just not there. But polling, one of the things I'm going to be coming out with before voting day is about the massive fraud in Canadian polling and its relationship to Canadian media and the way it is promoted dubiously. And I do not make that statement whatsoever about Frank Graves. I appreciate his work. I believe that what I will be publishing will vindicate him somewhat, and I'm concerned that there's a silencing campaign on. They're basically the ones that are conducting fraudulent polls. They're all trying to silence Frank Graves because he's doing it legit. So I really want to make sure that his work is heard, but we have a massive scandal about Canadian polling.
Well, I guess we can look forward to that when you find the time.
I need to sleep for 2 days before I go at it again.
Well, I mean, like I said, as soon as I knew of this piece, I mean, it didn't take me long before I was bothering you to come on the show. And I appreciate you. I know how limited your time has been, and I know how hard you've worked, as you always do, on these sorts of things. I thank you again for coming back to the show. And again, that's at freethepresscanada.org is your site. The hyperlink for the specific article is on the bottom of the show page description. Is there anything else you want to talk about regarding this?
I guess I could let it slip. The other big one that I have in the works is about the threat to our Constitution. because I know a couple people have mentioned it, but generally the public is not understanding what's at stake in this election. It's an all-hands-on election, and it's getting treated like it's not. But if Scheer is to win government, Conservatives will hold the majority with the provincial leaders to open the Constitution and change it and scrap the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and any other issues that they had with it, and who knows if they would scrap it altogether. But that's why there's such a hard play on for them to win, and why international entities, possibly connected with Stephen Harper's IDU, why they're all banding together and trying to take over the democracies that they can to get control of that. And Canada, this has never been possible in our history before, but in this election it is. So if you want to keep your women's rights, your right to gay marriage, your right to not be discriminated against, to be protected from hate speech, this is all on the table right now. I don't care what Andrew Scheer says. That's why, the picture that they took together, the quote, resistance in Maclean's magazine, that's what that's about. They're rallying their crews for this, and everybody's throwing in to get it done. And that's why the media would behave this way when it is connected to Conservatives in that way.
Well, I agree. I can expand on that. That is exactly why Manitoba saw their Conservative government go to the polls 15 months before they had to. They do have an election law, but they chose to go 15 months early because if things work out as they hope, they have 3 years, with the exception, I believe, of Saskatchewan, that they have to fool around before their majority to open the Constitution changes, because people who are not familiar, the rules are 2/3 of provincial governments and the federal government must be in agreement. And once the Constitution of Canada is opened, you don't open it to change one clause. When it's open, it's open. So you have people
you got the real threat of the Alberta separation and the Quebec separation. That's the kind of chaos that they would throw us into, because you can't open up the Constitution without everybody jockeying for that power.
Oh, absolutely. But I think the big issue I want people to think about is the silly challenges that provincial governments have been launching, be it about the carbon tax or C-48 or C-69. Think about what happens if they open the Constitution and they remove the ability of the Supreme Court of Canada to make these decisions. Then what?
And that's
Canada
one of their biggest
changes.
beefs is the Supreme Court. They call the Supreme Court liberalized, and they've been at odds with it, and heavily so during Stephen Harper's tenure, actually. That was unheard of, but they've got a vengeance Supreme Court.
They've got a vengeance with laws that apply to them as they're written. And it was in the last day or two, the Conservatives put out more pieces of their platform, and Scheer himself is quoted as saying, "We believe that Parliament makes laws, not the courts." That's a misrepresentation that's as old as the hills, but they're sticking to it, and you know what it means. Look what's happening in some places in the United States as far as legislation from 100 years ago is passing again now. So that's the big underlying issue. We talked about whether we would bring this up, and I'll tell the audience, it's not getting traction that I can find. I think it is a fundamental existential issue for Canada as we know it.
That's why I'm undertaking to really write about this and lay it out for people so they understand exactly what's at stake and how close we are to teetering with it.
Yeah, and the formula itself is 2/3 and the feds and 50% plus one of the population. So, I mean, if you look at right now, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, New Brunswick, that's 5 right there. Quebec
PEI
can be brought in. Well, I think PEI is not going to play. They are actual progressive conservatives.
That's possible, but when you've got that at stake and you only need to get one little guy on board, and then I think Northwest Territories or Yukon, one of them, I believe, is also conservative.
But they don't count. They're not provinces.
Right.
They're territories. The feds make all the calls for them. But
definitely
Quebec
would come on board.
Yeah, so I mean, there's 6. So we need one more of Nova Scotia, which is possible. Newfoundland is retained their Liberal government, and BC obviously is not of the same color. But as long as you have Ontario and Quebec, you're well over the 50% threshold. So it's not that far away that Canada could fundamentally change. And this is their one shot at it in the next few years, because like we said, when the Constitution was repatriated in 82 and the amending formula was seen, people said, we're never going to be able to accomplish that in Canada. Well, it's 2019 and we're dangerously close. And it's not
Their mouths
because
are watering.
and it's not because we have a bunch of progressive parties that want to change Canada. It's because we have conservative, neoliberal, neo-fascist tendency governments. We have ordered populism knocking at the door. And we've seen what happens with constitution changes in places like Brazil, where duly elected presidents suddenly end up in prison and the country changes overnight. So, don't think it can't happen here, because it can.
Right, and that should give context to the scandal about Jason Kenney and Doug Ford touring the U.S. and Doug Ford saying that he's Republican all the way. Give it this context now, and it means something a lot bigger than just that statement.
Yeah, I agree again. And I mean, people wonder why Jason Kenney he brags about he's met one-on-one with 6 premiers in Canada already. Gee, 6, eh? How interesting. What's the magic number? 7. The little clues are out there, but, like everything else, like the current scandal we're discussing, we only look one direction. We only have one ear open. This is what we're going to report. Never mind everything that goes against our current revenue engine.
And they have the media keeping everybody good and distracted from it. What's really at issue this time?
Yeah, I think so. Well, wow. Listeners, I know how much work this lady puts in when she gets motivated and decides that people have to know something. So I certainly encourage you all to go to freethepresscanada.org and read it. And there's a whole shitload of her other work there as well. Amy, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Glenn. It's always a pleasure, and I appreciate the work you do as well.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's it. Any closing, anything else, or just everybody stay tuned because you got more goodies coming?
Yeah, just keep watching my page. I'll be working on things over the next 3 weeks to get it out to everyone, some significant investigations, and I've put up a link to Elections Canada. So if this does concern you, if you do believe that it needs to be a complaint, I'm not trying to twist anyone's arm, but if you share the same viewpoint that I do, then I would encourage you to use that link and to actually file a complaint with Elections Canada requesting an investigation.
Alrighty. There you go. Well, I think we made a very good case. There is no brownface scandal without dirty tricks. Agreed?
Agree.
All right. Thank you very much, Amy.
Thanks, Glenn. Have a great night.
You too. All righty. There we go. So now we have 3 shows left before the election. I had to do the whole show on my cell phone because for some reason my headset will not be picked up by BTR. Maybe I'll get that figured out. Regardless, I can say that one of those 3 shows before the election will have Mr. Stephen Lawton's returning. Look forward to that. But that's it for tonight with Amy McPherson, and there is no brownface scandal without dirty tricks. Thank you, everybody, for listening to The View Up Here. We'll see you next week. Good night.